20 teams in the last 20 years have done what I would call tank. What's worked, what hasn't, and does the tank work? Next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
How are you? I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and I am super proud of today's show. So thank you for taking the time to join us. Here's the deal. I went back through every team since 2004-05 that finished in the bottom five in standings. My feeling is if you finish in the bottom five of the standings, you probably meant to. And if you did it for more than 2 years in a row, that's a tank. And if you did it for more than 3 years in a row, that's a full tank. And we'll dig in to the 20 teams that have done that since 2004, 2005. How many have been successful? What can be learned about what types of tanks there are? And what is the model the Utah Jazz should be following if, in fact, it is time to tank? And they have not done so yet, which gets back to the whole conversation of the week about picking a lane. So that's coming up on the show. I'm super proud of it. Tell 12 friends, tell 30 friends, have smart conversations with other people because this was done, and then you'll actually have facts to it. And whether you have a conclusion at the end will probably be up to what you believe in, which is kind of cool. I'm not going to browbeat you and tell you that there's one answer here, but there is seemingly a little bit of a trend that maybe the Jazz know exactly what they're doing by keeping Lauri Markkanen. We'll explain that if, in fact, they do keep Lauri Markkanen as we continue. As I mentioned, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you for making Locked on Jazz your first listen. We are free and available on all podcasting apps and on YouTube. So please, as a thank you for the research, subscribe, follow, hit the bell button. Give a thumbs up if you like the fact that instead of we're going to actually talk about facts about what's actually happened here in the history of the NBA for the last 20 years about tanking. Okay. And to the everydayers who are used to this stuff, thank you very much. A few things. I got to give a shout out to Spence Checkits. This is Roan. This is his brother's product. It's great. I'm not getting paid for it. They actually have advertised with us before, but I just had it on. I thought about it. So shout out to Spence. Second thing, fun day. Locked On is launching 2 national fast channel TVs stations, a NFL channel and a college sports channel. The NFL, they're both on Amazon Fire TV. They're also on YouTube. So if you go to Locked on NFL on YouTube or Locked on college football on YouTube, and you'll get a 24/7 stream with it, and you just watch one show after another. It's super cool. Okay, let's go. You ready? I've got a whole spreadsheet here. I'll just, for those of you on YouTube, I will just share it so you can see it. I don't know that it will actually do you a whole lot of good as I'm doing the show, but we'll share it for you. Okay, here's the definitions of what we're working on. Any team that finished in the bottom 5 in records, I think tanked. Like it's a conscious effort to have one of the 5 worst records in the NBA. Okay, that's first premise. So you can decide whether you agree or not. The second premise is that if you do it for 2 years in a row or 3, it's a moderate tank. If you do it for 3 years in a row or longer, you really went all in on the tank. Okay? That's the model. 20 teams in the NBA have done this since 2004, 2005. They're all in purple if you're looking at the YouTube screen. If you're seeing green is success. Green is you got to the promised land or you had success. Anything on the screen that you see as green is a Western Conference final or Eastern or Conference final or an NBA final. Let me just give you 1 or 2 quick notes here. And then we're going to dig into I'm going to give you the punchline first, and trust me that you're going to stay with us. Okay. 20 teams have been in the bottom 5 for 2 or more years. Some of those are still kind of a work in progress. And it actually might be 21. I might have just missed one here. Some of those are still a work in progress. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. 21, not 20. I just forgot to highlight Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City's progressing out of it. We don't know how far they're going to go. Detroit, Houston, and Orlando's latest second round of tanking are all kind of works in progress. So 4 of them are really works in progress. 17 teams have been in the bottom 5 for 2 or more years. Of those 17 teams, the Oklahoma City Thunder with James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant went to the Western Conference Finals. The Atlanta Hawks went to the Eastern Conference Finals on each of their tanks. And the Memphis Grizzlies went to the conference finals off their tank. And Phoenix went to the NBA Finals off of theirs. So only truly one team has ever made the NBA Finals off of a tank. It was the Phoenix Suns. They butchered their tank to some extent and signed Chris Paul in a deal that vaulted them to be an NBA Finals team. Okay? 3 other teams, the Hawks twice, the Grizzlies, and the Thunder, have made the conference finals. So, of the 17 completed tanks, maybe 18 completed tanks, 17 completed tanks, we have 3 conference finals and 1 NBA final. Okay? Like, I'm not sure that means it fails, by the way. So according to this, on those tanks, you have about a 22% chance if you tank to end up in the conference finals. That might be better than any other route. Right? Like that but it's certainly not a sure thing. Of the 17 tanks that are completed, 9 of the 17 got to the second round of the playoffs. 53% chance of making the second round of the playoffs. 1 out of 17, as we said, made the NBA Finals. So 6% chance to make the finals. Conference finals, you have about a 22% chance. And to make the second round, you have a 53% chance. And to make the playoffs, you go tank, you lose, you're in the bottom 5 for 2 or more straight years, you have an 83% chance of making the playoffs. Oh, wait a sec. Maybe the tank works. 83% chance to make the playoffs. Nearly 50% chance, about a 52% chance to make the second round. 5 of 17 teams have made the conference finals. 4 of 7 teams have made the conference finals or better. Or one NBA final. Now, that's kind of where we are. So there's some real argument that the tank works. As much as I've been like, does the tank work? Well, that, depending what your goal is, if you're trying to get back to the playoffs, it can be pretty short-lived, as you're about to see, but that's getting back to the playoffs. Getting to the second round, that's not bad. I don't mind. I'm kind of in on that. I'm not a championship or bust guy, but getting the conference finals and getting to the NBA finals, a little tougher. There does seem to be somewhat of a model for what works on a tank and what doesn't. And I think it should impact how the Jazz look at the possibility of trading Lauri Markkanen. Next on Locked On Jazz. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel giving you the great, making every moment more for you. A great time over at FanDuel each and every day with daily bonuses, added fun. The summer may have slowed down, but nothing at FanDuel has possibly slowed down because FanDuel's got it set right now so that for those of you that are participating and playing, there are daily bonuses. Super fun being built into the day with all customers getting daily boosts. FanDuel.com, your official home for all sorts of fun things. And by the way, you can start doing some NBA futures already. Those are actually up and out with win totals and that. So like from a Jazz standpoint, you could look and decide whether you think Lauri Markkanen's going to get traded or not and decide what you think that's our win total and probably guess. The NBA Eastern Conference champion is Boston at plus 140, 76ers at plus 420, and then the Knicks at plus 470. The West, Oklahoma City at plus 310, Minnesota at 450, Dallas at 450, and Denver at 450. They have that pretty even. They even have an NBA Cup champion possibilities. Regular season wins, as we mentioned, is out there. If you haven't heard, the Utah Jazz over-under for the regular season wins is 27.5. That's all at FanDuel.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also in Logan and in Linden. The great people over at Murdoch's, Blake and the crew, have been with Utah for over 80 years, and they want to make sure that you have a no-regrets experience. And the brand new Santa Fe is cooking. Plus, the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6 have won the Electric Car of the Year awards time and time again. And now you have the redone Santa Fe 2024 new, or maybe it's a 2024 Santa Fe calligraphy, all-wheel drive, 4D sport utility, looking incredible and there for you at Murdoch Hyundai. I'm driving the Palisade right now. Couldn't ask for anything more out of that as well. Go check it out. If you're going to go, email me first at dlock09@gmail.com. That's dlock09@gmail.com so we can get you your VIP experience. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. We got the 2 new channels today. If you want to check those out, it's kind of fun. Throw it up on your YouTube, throw it up on your Amazon Fire TV, throw it up on, you can get the News On or the Zeem app and get them on your phone as well and just be absorbing NFL and college stuff all day long. Kind of great. So feel free to check it out at Locked On. Also, new national show, Big 6 and 60, super fun. All right, let's get back to it. So there are models that seem to work, and we can decide, you're going to have to decide what you think is a successful tank. And that's really, a continued run of success. So let's start back in 2004, 2005, because I'm going to go through what I think are the successes first. So the Atlanta Hawks had Joe Johnson they traded for Joe Johnson with Phoenix and signed him as a free agent, and then proceeded to tank for 3 straight years. And in those 3 years, they added Marvin Williams, Josh Smith, Sheldon Williams, which was a mistake, and Al Horford to Joe Johnson. And then they proceeded to make the playoffs for not 10 straight years, including a 2014-15 Eastern Conference run. And they made the second round of the playoffs 4 different times with Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, Marvin Williams, Al Horford. Quite a good team. And that was all built on a tank. They had the fourth worst record in over a 4-year period. They tanked. And that got them an Eastern Conference Finals as well as 5 straight playoff runs. So I would call Hawks number 1 a success. Another successful tank, just a little different, is Dallas goes 1 year in, gets Luka, and gets out. So they add Luka to Harrison Barnes. They had some solid Tim Hardaway Jr. They had some solid players around that roster, and they get Luka and they get out. So that was a 1-year tank. It's worth kind of giving note to that. There's some funky ones when you get to the Cleveland Cavaliers where they tank and then sign LeBron. And I just think that's not a sustainable model. So I have eliminated that from this conversation. Okay. The Memphis Grizzlies had a good tank. They had the worst record in the league and then the 4th worst record in the year in 2 years in a row. And they added Mike Conley to Rudy Gay, Pau Gasol, and Mike Miller. Those are pretty good players. They drafted Mike Conley and OJ Mayo, which wasn't great. They then traded Pau Gasol for Marc Gasol and then had a fabulous grind run of 8 years in the playoffs in a Western Conference final. So they 2-year tanked. All they got out of it was Mike Conley and OJ Mayo, but they had Pau Gasol, Mike Miller on the team, and then they traded. Okay? The Oklahoma City tank and drafting of Durant, Westbrook, Harden, and Ibaka is incredible. And their cupboard was completely bare. So Oklahoma City did what nobody else has done successfully, which is have a completely bare cupboard. No good, really barely any NBA players. They went to the bottom for 3 straight years. And then they had this incredible run of 4 Western Conference finals. And then they held it on with Paul George and the rest. And then they retanked. And we're in the midst of it right now. And we'll see after 2 years at the bottom what happens with them and how they do this. And they did it again. What they did, this second tank, Oklahoma City's second tank, is they took Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams and added them to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Okay? So they tanked with the cupboard full. The Phoenix Suns have the most bizarre tank of all. They have the 4th worst, second worst record in the NBA for 4 years in a row. They're on the road to nowhere. They've drafted Alex Len, Devin Booker, Marquise Chris, Dragan Bender, Josh Jackson, DeAndre Ayton, and Mikal Bridges. I mean, they have butchered this. And then they sign Chris Paul and go to the NBA Finals. Just got to call it a success. So they do it reverse. They had a pretty bare cupboard, but then they added the superstar on top of their young players, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton, and got to the finals. That is the most successful tank out there in regards to furthest spot you can get. Kind of a bizarre tank, but it is the one that is the furthest, got the furthest. I mean, Oklahoma City's Durant, Westbrook, Harden, greatest drafting run 3 years in the history of the NBA is probably the most successful. Portland Trailblazers are really interesting. I don't know how to view it. So the Portland Trailblazers had a 2-year tank in 2004, 2005, and 2005, 2006, in which they added Sebastian Telfair, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Brandon Roy to Zach Randolph, who was already on the roster and pretty good. And then they had but they only made the first round 3 years in a row, and then it bottoms out and they get out of the playoffs. And then they get the great Gerald Wallace trade and they get Dame Lillard and they reload that thing with LaMarcus, and then they acquire a bunch of players. So I don't know what you think of it, because honestly, their tank kind of failed. And then they get Dame otherwise, and they kind of circle it back up. So you can decide which one. So we really have 5 very successful tanks out of the 17 of them that we have on record, and we'll see where Oklahoma City goes. We'll see where Detroit goes. We'll see where Houston goes. We'll see where Orlando number 2 goes. But right now, we kind of have 5 really successful tanks. We have a few others that are worth mentioning. Cleveland goes and signs LeBron. The Lakers tank for 3 years. They trade those pieces to get Anthony Davis and sign LeBron. My story on this is just sign LeBron and you'll be okay. And I don't really think you can use either of those Cleveland or LA ones as models. Let's look at some of the failures. Okay. The Hornets tank. They draft Raymond Felton, Mecca Okafor, Adam Morrison. They do it with the cupboard bare. They draft those players, then they try to add on Boris Diaw and Steven Jackson. And they get 1 first-round appearance in which they get swept 5 years after their tank, and they have to retank a second time, where the cupboard goes bare again, and they add Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Kemba Walker, and Cody Zeller, and they fail again. They get 3 first-round appearances, no wins, and they've not done anything since. So we're going to call those 2 failures of tanks. The Pistons right now are 4 years into a tank, seemingly no sign out of it. They started with the cupboard bare. The Rockets are 3 years into their tank. They started with their cupboard bare. The Minnesota Timberwolves were the 3rd worst, 5th worst, 2nd worst, and 1st worst team in the league from 07-08 to 2010, and they had their cupboard bare. They started that with 0. Andrew Wiggins, Kevin Love, and they never make the playoffs. And they actually then retake again in 2014, 2015, and 15, 16. And they get nothing out of it. They have back-to-back failure tanks. And their cupboard's pretty bare when they do it. The Orlando Magic tank for 5 out of 6 years. Victor Oladipo to nothing. They then add Elfrid Payton and Aaron Gordon and Mario Hezonja and Jonathan Isaac, and they make 2 first rounds, and then they pivot out of that and retank again. That's a failure. Again, they added to nothing. I don't know where to put the Philadelphia 76ers in their run, and we'll look at the Kings and the Wizards tanks as well as we continue, but you're beginning to see a reoccurring theme here on some tanks and what works and what doesn't. And we'll continue on Locked on Jazz. Thank you so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen today. If you want Jazz, we're talking Jazz each and every time. No other stuff. You want Jazz, you come here, you go to Locked on Jazz, you know exactly what you're going to get. It's how the Locked on Podcast Network works. Glad to have you aboard. Thank you. Subscribe, follow, hit the bell button. Get us over 50% subscribers. Please. Thumbs up if you like the research on this show. Okay, let's continue. I'm proud of this show, by the way. I hope you guys like it. So the 76ers, I have no idea what to put them. So they did the 4-year massive tank, and out of it, they got Michael Carter-Williams, Dario Saric, Jahlil Okafor, and Joel Embiid. They got one player out of the tank. And then they go to second round, first round, second round, first round. And then, but they did it now by adding James Harden and Tyrese Maxey and non-tank players. I don't even know if their success right now is about the tank. It's about Joel Embiid. So I don't know where to put them. But they would go in the bucket of teams that started on empty. And what you're beginning to see here is teams that started with a little something in the cupboard have some success out of the tank. And teams that start totally empty don't seem to have success. The Sacramento Kings were the first worst, third worst, fifth worst record in the NBA for 4 years with nothing in the cupboard. Yielded nothing. They didn't even retank to get to this team. They got De'Aaron Fox, but they never retanked to the bottom of the barrel. The Washington Wizards are really interesting because the Washington Wizards had a 4-year tank. Second worst, fourth worst, and second worst record in the NBA. They had Gilbert Arenas on the roster, and they drafted John Wall, Jan Vesely, who was a disaster, and then they added Bradley Beal. And they made the second round of the playoffs 3 times. That was a borderline successful tank and very difficult to define because Gilbert Arenas was really, really good and was on that roster, but then he's not a part of the finishing piece. But you don't necessarily have to be part of the finishing piece. But it gave them a little something there. So as you start to walk through these, and the last one I would just kind of give you that's interesting is the Atlanta Hawks' most recent tank. They had the 4th worst, 5th worst record. They get DeAndre Hunter. They get Cam Reddish. They get Okongwu, and they get Trae Young. And they get an Eastern Conference Finals right out of the bat. And now they're kind of a mess. It was kind of a blip on the radar screen, and it came together, but it was out of emptiness. That's probably the most successful empty tank that there is the Atlanta Hawks 1-year run. Doesn't seem to have been sustainable, which is interesting for them with Trae Young and their run. The Atlanta Hawks added with Lloyd Pierce for 2 years, and then they're 20 and 47. It's also during a little bit of that whole COVID stuff. But their last year with Mike Budenholzer in 2018, they really have left Dennis Schroeder's their best player. Taurean Prince is their second best. That was a cupboard bear tank. So if we start to look at this and we look at Atlanta Hawk, the successful tanks, the 04 to 07 Atlanta Hawk tank, which leads to 10 years of playoffs, starts with Joe Johnson in the fold, and then they draft players. The successful Dallas Mavericks single-year tank, there's some single-year tanks that actually, Boston goes down and trades all their pieces and gets the incredible deal to rebuild their franchise with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, but they're down for 1 year. If we trade Lauri Markkanen, we're down for more than a year. Maybe we keep Lauri Markkanen, maybe we're 1 year now. By the way, the Cleveland Cavaliers tanked for 3 years from 2018 to 2021, and they're still in the midst of it right now. That one's a little hard to define, but it looks like it's going to be a success. And that was them. That was pretty close to cupboard bear. They traded for Jared Allen. They got Evan Mobley. Darius Garland. That was pretty close to cupboard bear. That's worth noticing. But the next successful tank is the Grizzlies had a 2-year tank and then have their run. That's with Pau Gasol on the roster. That's their version of Lauri Markkanen, who they do trade for Marc Gasol, but he's still on the roster. Oklahoma City does it with the cupboard bear. The Suns do it with the cupboard bear and then add Chris Paul at the end. And Portland does it fairly well in a weird way, kind of, maybe not, with Zach Randolph in the fold. So the model seems to say that if you're going to do this and have lasting success, you probably can't have the cupboard bear. It's pretty hard. And then I don't know what you determine as success on this. The last 2 years have been painful for Jazz fans. If we suddenly are in it for, we haven't tanked yet, right? Like that's the pick a lane argument. Is that we haven't picked a lane. Danny and Justin haven't gone down to the barrel. Ryan hasn't gone down to the bottom. We've been pretty good, and then we pulled the plug, but we're not just horrendous for 82 straight games and in one of the 5 bottom records in the NBA. We haven't done that. And it's interesting. There's 12 teams that have done it for 3 years in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 teams have done it. 2 of them are still in progress, Detroit and Houston. Hard to tell where they're going to go. Cleveland's a little bit in progress. So there's 11 teams. Atlanta did it twice in a row. Both times got to an Eastern Conference Finals. The Lakers did it, traded for AD and LeBron and won a title. Minnesota did it, didn't make the playoffs. Oklahoma City did it, got to 4 Western Conference Finals. Orlando did it, got to 2 first-round exits and had to restart again. Suns, we've talked about in their bizarre thing. Kings did it without the playoffs. And the Wizards 2 years in a row. That's not a bad track record, frankly. Right? I mean, the signing LeBron makes those 2 really, really funky. But Cleveland's in it right now. They're a second-round team. So if we take out the 2 LeBrons, Hawks make the second round in the Eastern Conference Finals. Cleveland makes the second round. Minnesota's an empty. Oklahoma City makes the Western Conference Finals. Orlando's kind of an empty. Phoenix makes the finals. Sacramento's an empty. Washington makes. So 5 of the 8 teams that have lost for 3 years in a row made the second round of the playoffs. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Now that's 3 years in a row. Are you willing to go for 3 more years here? And again, most of those are without the cupboard being bare. The ones that didn't work, Minnesota, Orlando, Sacramento, were cupboard bare. Washington was borderline. Phoenix and Oklahoma City did work as cupboard bare. It's interesting. 5 teams have gone back-to-back bottom 5 records for 2 years. The Hornets have done it twice, failed both times. Memphis did it, had success. The Pelicans did it in there. We haven't really talked about it. They get Anthony Davis, and then it bails out. And Portland did it and had their playoff start and then got to Damian Lillard. For 2 years. Memphis is a pretty good success rate there. Mike Conley and Marc Gasol turned out to, that's 1 Western Conference Finals. 6 straight years of the playoffs. Pretty hard to complain with that. But the Pelicans were maybe on the road, but Anthony Davis gets out. Portland's is funky, I tell you. It's all because they get Dame somewhere along the way, and they got the Gerald Wallace deal. Maybe we have enough picks we could pull that off. But the Hornets were a flop twice. My consensus on this is there does seem to be some success after a tank, if you commit to it for 2 or 3 years. 15 of the 18 teams have made the playoffs. It's not an answer necessarily. Maybe 22% chance of going to the NBA conference finals is actually better than you'd get otherwise. I think that might be true. So I do think there's something to this. But it does seem to also say that doing it with the cupboard bare is a lot harder than having a piece or two that gives you some semblance of order while you're losing a lot. Difficult to thread that needle. That seems to be what the Jazz are trying, and maybe there's some logic to it. That is today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Hope you're doing great. I am probably out for the next 2 weeks. I don't think I'm getting another show. I'm going to Hawaii, I'll just be honest. I am taking my stuff in case the Lowry thing, I will do a show around the Lowry whenever it happens. Leaf Tulane will be taking over here shortly. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the wrong open. We now send you the first ever national 24/7 sports channel, Locked On Sports Today. Check out Locked On NFL and Locked On College Football. And if you're on audio, check out the Big 6 and 6. Have a great one.